Hey YouTube, this is Evan Magician 34 with this week's edition of The Edge. And this week I'm going to be talking about how to side deck. And this is a very quick tutorial, but it'll give you an idea of how to go at it. First off, for those of you who may not know or be completely familiar, your side deck is 15 cards that you can change into your deck from your side deck on a one-for-one basis with cards from your main deck between games 1 and 2 and games 2 and 3. In other words, you can't use your side deck during game 1, but after game 1, when you have an idea of what you're playing against, you can switch up to 15 of those cards in for the same number of cards out of your main deck. And then after game 2 and before game 3, you can change again if you so desire. Any way you want, as much as you like. Obviously, you want to run all 15 cards of your side deck. You don't have to have a 15-card side deck. It can be less than that, but you really need to run 15. Just because more options is better. Even if you can't think of some of the extras or you couldn't get something at the tournament, any cards to fill up to 15 will improve your odds, if only slightly, by giving you something you can play instead. But obviously we want to use those 15 slots to the maximum we can. And there are some specific functions your side deck cards can perform. One is they can be sort of specific answers for a certain opponent. They can also serve as more generalized answer cards that can work on a variety of opponents, and may be more pointedly aimed at one opponent, one opposing deck you anticipate playing against, but can side in against a number of them. Also, sometimes you have main deck cards that aren't always as effective in certain other matchups, and you may have to side it out against other opponents. So you may want a generalized good side-in card, which may even be more effective in the matchups you anticipate where that main deck choice won't be good. So, more of a replacement card, if you will. This is an old strategy, but there's also such a thing as cards for going to time. This hasn't been done in a while, but if you choose to, you can use your side deck as a means to, when time is about to run out, side in a bunch of cards that are burn or life gain, in order to make sure that you win the game where you go to turns in time by having more life points than your opponent. There's also something called a transforming side deck that's fairly rare, but what that is it's like, more than 10 of your 15 cards in your side deck, maybe even all 15, all side in to give your deck the power to change from being one deck into a completely different deck, because 15 cards changing in your deck can actually very much change its character. That's almost all the monsters in most decks. So a transforming side deck gives you the power to completely blindside your opponent by suddenly be playing a different deck. And with all the similarity and support cards like Tour Guide and whatnot these days, actually that's not very difficult to do right now. And of course, another function you can perform is anticipating your opponent's side deck choices and siding in counter sides, or anti-side decking cards, or whatever you want to call them, where basically you know what your opponent's side deck cards are typically going to be for your deck, so you side into answers for what you anticipate they'll use against you. Now, obviously, you need to prioritize your needs in order to figure out what you should be putting in your 15-card side deck. And there are several ways you figure it out. First of all, you have to remember that the more cards you side in against any given opponent, the bigger the impact will be. And that's on both players. Obviously, if you side in 8 cards for your opponent, you'll have a lot of very specific cards for that one opponent, and it gives you a big edge on them. But it also changes the dynamic of how your deck plays and may slow down your overall theme by being really full of specific answers. So you need to be aware of that. So how do you figure out how many of my 15 cards should be this, how many should be this, how many should be that? Well, first of all, you need to figure out, are there cards that you may need to side out for certain matches? If so, how many are there and how many replacements will you need? Also, the difficulty of a given matchup. Are Agents a really tough matchup for you? Are Dark Worlds a really tough matchup? Are Gladiator Beasts a really tough matchup? And ask yourself these questions. The answers will help tell you, well, since, say, Agents is a really tough matchup for you, maybe you should dedicate more slots in your deck to stopping Agents. Versus, say, Dark Worlds, which if you have a fairly easy matchup against them, maybe you only want to side 1 or 2 cards, or maybe not even any. Also, the effective numbers of the cards sided in are important to think about. For instance, how many of this card should I side in to be effective? Is 1 enough, or do I need 2, or do I really want to hit all 3 copies? Cards like, say, Shadow Imprisoning Mirror, maybe you don't want to run just the 1 or the 2. because you want to hit it early so as to shut off your opponent. So you really do want to run a full 3 on this. But a card like DD Crow is very searchable, and oftentimes you only need to fire it once, maybe twice tops, so maybe you only side 1 or 2 of this guy. And another thing you might want to consider is, would drawing multiples of a card be good in your hand? Maybe 3 isn't a good idea on this, because drawing 2 or even all 3 of these can be very bad, since multiples on the field don't really do anything. And also, how big of an impact does it have? This has a huge impact on Dark Worlds. So, once again, maybe the multiples are worth the risk. This is what your playtesting is going to determine for you, is which half of that is good, essentially. Is it worth the multiples? Is it not? Do your other side deck cards kind of cover it? Do you need less coverage? Do you need even more cards to side in against that opponent? These are your questions. How easily do you side in cards for that matchup, too? Do you have a lot of cards that are automatically going to want to come out because they're not well matched? If so, then you can automatically side in more. Maybe you can use more versatile sides too, in addition to very pointed sides, to help you in that matchup. How many different decks do you need to side against? Anticipate the meta. That's a very important part of side decking. Just what opponents are you likely to see? Is there overlapping in your side deck? Does one side deck choice answer multiple decks and allow you to sort of conserve space in your side deck by siding in against multiple players? So, basically, those are the questions you need to ask. And I can't answer them for you, and it's one of the reasons I don't post side decks with my decks usually, is because I want you to think about it, because the meta game you're going to be playing in is all important. You know the decks at your local, and they're going to be different from the decks you see at a regionals most likely, or at, say, a YCS. And you need to be familiar with the meta. Look up tournament reports online. See what other people are posting online recently in the way of decks. This is what's going to tell you how to side and what to side. But, and I can't say this enough, the number one thing that's going to give you a good side deck and give you the edge in a match is playtesting. So, till next time, rate, comment, subscribe, and check out my channel for more cool videos.